Hi, it's Dwyer. It is August 19th, 2025. Money, 1776.com, a free site. Always 1776.com, a free site. Nothing I say in this video should be construed as investment advice. I want everyone here to do their own diligence and to think for themselves. If I mention a stock, just understand that I might be self-interested. I might be considering buying it, or I might already own it. Right? Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Please, think for yourself. Trust no one, including me. Now, folks, you may have heard about China's economic problems. You may have heard that China right now is having an acute real estate crisis, right? And real estate is a big part of the Chinese economy. But yet, I need for people to understand that the Shanghai Composite Index is near a 10-year high. Let me repeat that. The Shanghai Composite Index is near a 10-year high. Please, in China and here in the United States, don't be seduced by stock market indexes, right? The numbers are inflated due to a cheapening of the currency. Now, I disagree with government numbers, right? I have a different feel for the economy. It's based on layoffs, people's spending habits. I was recently on a trip to the Midwest, not to Vegas. As you know, traffic is down big time in Vegas the last few months. And let me just say, I was taking Southwest Airlines, and they announced that there were 80 vacant seats. 80 vacant seats on the plane I was riding on for part of my trip. Right? So the powers that be at Southwest politely told the passengers, you can spread out. Folks, understand, that happened this month. This is summer. You would think if the economy was a bullish economy, people would be traveling, people would be out vacationing, people would be, doing things with their family before Labor Day. They're not, right? Talk with your neighbors, talk with your friends. It's my belief that we're already in a recession. Understand, when they release numbers, those numbers are always prone to later downward revisions, as we've seen with the labor market. Right? So just understand, right now, you're dealing with stock prices that don't have real earnings to support them. Rather, they have the fake earnings that come from inflation. Right? And you should question the inflation numbers. I don't know about you, but, I go to coffee houses from time to time. I was in a Bay Area coffee house yesterday, Phil's. I had a medium coffee. It came to around $6, just a shade under $6. I remember going to Starbucks and several other coffee houses and paying less than $4.50 for coffees, particularly medium coffees. Not even the large size. Right? And so to me, the inflation numbers are bogus. Just go on DoorDash right now and ask yourself if it's possible for you to order a meal for less than $20. Right? Go into a McDonald's. You might remember being in McDonald's, getting a burger for you, getting a burger for your kid, and I don't mean one of these value menu burgers. Getting drinks and the bill coming to less than $12. Try that today in California. Folks, it's a damn near impossibility. Right? So don't be fooled by the stock market. Don't be fooled by politicians telling you that the economy is great while they're firing people who are releasing the BLS numbers, right? While they're trying to pressure the Fed chairman to lower rates, right? Understand, lower rates would be inflationary. So now we're hearing that the private sector, companies like Apple, and let me point out that I believe the private sector has much more power than politicians, right? You need to understand that a lot of money creation is done by banks, not the Fed, right? Fractional reserve banking, folks, it's your local bank that's creating a lot of the money that's floating around the economy. Well, understand, I'm a critic of tariffs. I consider tariffs to be a tax on consumers, right? We're hearing now that private companies, as a result of tariffs, companies like Apple are promising to increase their manufacturing in the United States, right? That's being hailed by the media, and don't assume the media knows what they're doing. Don't assume the media understands basic economics. Please be a skeptic, right? The media is hailing the fact that these private companies are, when I say private, I just mean not government owned, right? Apple obviously is a publicly traded corporation, but these private companies are announcing that they're going to return manufacturing to the United States, right? And of course, the company itself wants to look patriotic, especially when they're advertising in the United States. So they're talking about how they're going to do millions of dollars worth of local manufacturing here in the United States. And we're supposed to be excited about that. As excited as we're supposed to be about hearing that, whereas before we were paying a tariff of 3 to 5%, now we're supposed to be excited that we're only paying a tariff of 15% because foreign countries that were taxing their local populaces have agreed to match us at 15%. Right? The dialogue's off. Well, what I want for people to think about is the evolution of manufacturing. Right? The assumption is that Apple is going to, and companies like Apple, are going to return some manufacturing to the United States, and that that's going to be on par with the assembly line from Henry Ford's days. Right? That people who remember the 1970s, the 1980s, we're to believe that they're going to be a whole group of workers, American workers, who will be working on these production lines, and they'll be making wages sufficient to buy a house in the local community, send kids to college. If we're nostalgic about the past, some people might even fantasize that only one parent in the household has to work. The other parent can be a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad. We want to believe that we're going to return to the glory days of the 1950s. Understand, too, assembly lines are relatively new. Right? Henry Ford is from the early 1900s. Right? It's only been a little bit over a century that we've had assembly lines. But we're going to pretend that we've always had assembly lines and that the return of manufacturing to the United States is going to return us to that lifestyle. Right? Middle class jobs, being on an assembly line. Right? Workers who don't need college degrees. They certainly don't need to pay college tuition. Rather, they can get that job at, you name it, Ford. They'll be, employee number 8, and they'll be able to make a multi-decade career out of it. Right, folks? That's all a myth. I have real bad news for people. That's 2025. What kind of assembly lines are these companies going to return to the United States? Right, folks? They might not feature many humans. Right now, the rage in China, which just had a robot Olympics, the rage in China is to replace human workers with robots. Right? Let me just say, just imagine for a moment that you want to buy a company. Let's say you're in a position where you want to take over some company and you have the wherewithal to do so. Right? Folks, the company is much more valuable if the manufacturing is done by robots. I've mentioned this in a prior video. Right? You know the repair costs. You aren't negotiating with a union, right? You have more cost certainty. Not only that, your talent can't just get up and leave, right? It's your robots. They work for you. They can work for you 24 hours a day. You aren't even vulnerable to the worker safety laws that are out there. Right? You don't have to comply with giving your workers breaks when they're robots. And let me point out, too, that the robots, of course, are much more agile. Thanks to recent technology, they're much more agile than they were just a few years ago. In other words, you have robots that can dance now. Right? And their intelligence level, thanks to AI, is increasing at an exponential rate. So, all of this chicanery, that's the word I'll use, where we have a president and he's pressuring Apple to return manufacturing jobs to the United States, we'll overlook the fact that, manufacturing overseas might be cheaper than manufacturing in the United States, and that returning manufacturing to the United States might actually be inflationary for the American consumer. We'll overlook all of that. Right? Just understand the jobs, we'll put them in quotes, that Apple's returning to the United States. Are you sure they're human jobs? How do you know that Apple isn't going to open up some warehouse and it's going to be predominantly staffed by robots, as many Amazon warehouses are currently staffed? Right, folks? You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Let me point out that there was a writer's strike in Los Angeles not too long ago. Right? And the union was making the push to prevent the use of technology, to mandate that human beings be the people who write the articles, right? Because just like your AI, whether it's Copilot or Grok, can write book chapters for you, they could also write screenplays, can't they? Probably for less than human beings. Right? Someone could type in, give me a screenplay of police in Miami, who are young, who are hip, who are well dressed, who are hitting fashionable restaurants, who are hitting clubs, who have romantic lives, who are pursuing criminals, who are involved in AI espionage, or money laundering or some crypto scam. Perhaps they're hackers hacking centralized crypto exchanges. You can type in a scenario, and believe it or not, AI will spit out at least a first draft for you. Right? So the union got concessions from studios. But you and I understand that the universe is much bigger than those unions and that studio. Right? You're dealing with worldwide demand for entertainment. You're dealing with entrepreneurs looking for an edge, looking to make profits, looking to lower costs. Right? So you need to ask yourself, what jobs are we talking about? Right? I would argue, and I need for viewers here to explore the possibility that all of these tariffs and all of these onshoring of manufacturing are based on a false premise that the manufacturing that returns to the United States is going to be done by humans. Not only that, it's going to be done by humans to an extent that the pay they receive is going to be appreciably above minimum wage. Right, folks? That might not be the case. Right? Let me point out, too, that in terms of writing, and we already know there's some publications that have been busted with fake authors. Right? I believe there's an athletic publication that got busted with fake bylines from, people who didn't exist, right? For articles written by AI. Now, I know we want to believe that humans will always have a role, right? Because creativity is part of the process. What I want to point out to folks is that there's something called trial and error, right? At a certain level of volume, some script that I have AI write is going to have original elements, right? If I have AI do 100 scripts, and why can't I? Because I'm, able to scale with AI. I'm not paying AI by the hour. If I have AI do 100 scripts, and I sit there and I ask AI, why would I even pay someone to read all the scripts? I ask AI to summarize the themes. I might find some very inventive AI authored stories, especially if the large language model is fed creative stories, especially if I can say, hey, here are the scripts of the 100 highest grossing movies over the last 10 years, right? Come up with some variation of the themes in this James Bond movie mixed with this Transformers movie mixed with this Superman movie, right? Have the villain be creative, and then I could sit back and see what it spits out, right? So just understand, we're in a fairy tale world right now where we are nostalgic about the 1950s, when the assembly line was in its infancy, when there really was no alternative but to have humans on the assembly line. Right, folks? Maybe that was a blip in history. Maybe the idea of creating middle class jobs isn't a necessary byproduct of having an assembly line. Soon you understand. You're going to need a cab. Your friends are going to tell you how they safely, in places like San Francisco, hard places to drive, hills, right, traffic, congestion, how they were safely able to get to a destination using a robotaxi, right? You understand that the same way that there could be an increase in the amount of robo-taxis and not have it increase the number of jobs for drivers, right? The same way Uber has felt a need, full disclosure, I own some Uber. Uber has felt a need to venture into the robo-taxi field, right? Uber is working with robo-taxi providers right now, right? Uber understands that their current very successful business model involving drivers might not withstand the test of time, right? I need for folks to also understand that the market is global. Whether or not you're seeing robo-taxis on your local street, just understand they're all over China right now, right? The same way EVs, electric vehicles, are dropping in price, in part because China is exporting EVs, right? Elon Musk opened a gigafactory in China, and of course China saw the demand of EVs, is on the cutting edge of technology. They've made it affordable for their citizens, right? There's a learning curve in all of this new technology. They're working out the kinks of robo-taxis in some of the most populated cities globally. Folks, that technology is going to hit American shores. So, you have software coders who've already been disintermediated, right? I'm a lawyer and I can tell you that I use a lot of AI now to write portions of briefs. In a few years, I think the demand for human lawyers is going to drop precipitously, right? Because people, just like you use Rocket Lawyer right now, there's going to be databases of contracts. And a contractor is going to say, hey, let me get a contract for this project. They won't need to hire a lawyer. They'll get a high-level contract prepared for them cheaply, right? The cost savings will justify the disintermediation of human lawyers, right? Right now in healthcare, as you could imagine, you have a lot of remote surgeries taking place. Your highly thought of doctor doesn't even need to be in the room with you to do surgery on you, right? Now, Donald Trump's in his 70s. My point to you is any assumption that Donald Trump is completely in sync with modern technology is based on what exactly? His predecessor, Joe Biden. Do you think his administration was in sync with cryptocurrency? I don't. Right, folks? Sometimes these politicians are the last to know what's happening. Sometimes private markets move things, create things that politicians later adapt to. Right? The internet, for example. So, let's remember, Netscape is done by Mark Andreessen, right? That's how we get that browser. It's not a government browser, even though the government did play a role in the development of the internet. So I need for folks to realize that the world is changing at an accelerated rate. Now, of course, we're finding out that China is far ahead of us. Let me repeat that, far ahead of us in terms of nuclear energy, right? The Mag 7 companies are all competing with each other aggressively, trying to come up with energy sources for their data centers. They're trying to come up with energy sources for AI, right? I would argue that it's not the government that's going to lead in terms of saving all of us. It's actually going to be private enterprise, right? Donald Trump is trailing the trailblazers in cryptocurrency. You have a new crypto exchange, bullish. The demand for it is obvious, right? It's really geared for institutional investors, right? The kind of players who, need to buy, need to sell, need a marketplace with the liquidity to handle multi-million-dollar exchanges, right? Crypto is happening now. You have major colleges investing portions of their endowments in cryptocurrency. Understand, trade ogre recently disappeared. You've had central exchanges fail. You've had central exchanges get hacked. The central exchanges were really based on crypto's history of, smaller retail investors. You might remember when crypto first came out, it was really a parallel financial system to traditional finance. Well, now, crypto is part of traditional finance. Right? I need for folks to understand that things are happening in the background that are going to have consequences and repercussions. So what I need for people to figure out is whether you're blue collar or white collar, your job's in danger. Right? Whether you're creative or not creative, your job is in danger. Right? I was on a website. It said, we'll clone your voice in 5 minutes. I thought, there's no way. They cloned my voice to such an extent that as I listened to the playback, I wasn't sure whether it was me or the clone. Right? Just understand, these people with great voices, Morgan Freeman, in an earlier generation, Vincent Price, you can clone his voice and then type out a script and have the script reader, the AI, sound exactly like Morgan Freeman or Vincent Price. Right, folks? You really wonder how far this is going to go. Once that happens, do I need to pay Morgan Freeman to say homes.com? It's the best. Right? If I could do that using AI, we're going to have to come up with different intellectual property rules. Let me tell you how AI really works too. They tweak things just enough where you can't be sued for an intellectual property violation. Right, folks? I've said this in the past. This background that I use here, and it's one of a few that say high risk. This was created in a matter of minutes using AI. I'm not saying it's sophisticated, but understand, years ago, I had to use a graphic designer. Now, maybe the graphic designer had more talent than AI does right now. But let's just say this background cost me nothing to create. Right? So what I want people to consider is that the financial news you're hearing is incorrect. That the idea of dropping interest rates, which I'm sure a debtor nation with a $37 trillion debt wants to do to reduce its borrowing costs, might be the worst possible thing for the economy, because then we're going to get more bills like the big beautiful bill, which was just another addition to a national debt that eventually we're going to have to decrease. You need to be skeptical of everything, right? Folks, it's been years. Social Security is still headed for financial insolvency. you understand by the time the government gets around to try to repair that system, it might be too late. So in this world, I believe what folks need to consider is the fact that we're already in recession, that many computer coders are not going to find work, right? You know, people who are unemployed, that many people who just graduated from college, who are out looking for jobs, might not find jobs in their field of study for several years, if at all. Right, folks? Disruption carries a cost, right? That all of these people who are hounding their local politician to prevent these institutional buyers from dominating the real estate market might be out of luck, because as real estate drops in value, and understand, we don't have the demographic tailwind that we had during the baby boom generation anymore. Right? As people are looking to sell their homes because they're in cities like Denver where homes are dropping precipitously in price. They're in places like Austin where homes are dropping. Tampa where homes are dropping in price. Right? If a Blackstone shows up and says, hey, we'll pay cash for your home. Here's what we're offering. Many home buyers are going to say, you know what, I lost my job as a computer coder. Right? The prospects for me finding commensurate employment and salary are diminished. I need to take this money. Right, folks? You're not going to stop Blackstone and others from materially changing the real estate market as we know it. Right? Quite frankly, money leaving the real estate market might actually help us in other parts of the economy. Right? So be prepared for upheaval. My advice, make sure your portfolio has some gold. Make sure and I mean physical gold, make sure your portfolio has some silver. Again, physical silver, right? In addition to whatever, offshore gold vaulting company that you have, right? Make sure you have some good crypto, right? They asked Luke Grumman, and he's excellent. They asked him about the possibility of quantum computing disrupting crypto. We act as if quantum computing is going to come along, it's going to just decimate crypto, and everything else will still be left standing. Luke Grumman pointed out that if quantum computing reaches a point where it can decimate crypto, it'll be able to decimate your local bank. We'll be in a lot worse shape than anyone wants to suggest. Right? You need to think that through. You need to think to yourself, I need to protect myself from the risk that the banking system gets destroyed by this heavy rate of change. Let me point out too that when Grok is telling you that its AI is PhD level on every subject, right? When you realize that AI is just getting started, what that means is there are going to be breakthroughs that seem like they are coming overnight, where AI is able to solve some of the great questions of our time, right? A cure for cancer, perhaps. My point to you is no one can tell you with certainty that the maturation of quantum computing is going to take 20 years before it's even remotely close to challenging the encryption of cryptocurrency. Folks, no one can tell you that. Right? Understand, once we get into an AI world, anything is possible. Right? We already know that computers can beat the best grandmasters, chess grandmasters in the world. Right? You're dealing with a speed of thought. You're dealing with computers who can work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Right? So folks, in this era where things we've heard for years, for decades, have proven to be false. You remember when, people were down on nuclear energy? You remember where we kept hearing about 3 Mile Island, and we kept hearing about nuclear contamination and stuff like that? Now, of course, you have these modular nuclear units because we understand we need nuclear energy. Right, folks? The stuff we were told for years, much of it has proven to be false. So you need to be nimble. I think you need gold. I think you need silver. I think you need good crypto. I'm not talking about meme coins. I'm not talking about crypto that has unlimited demand. Right? Let me say this too. And I love some of these treasury companies. Right? I plan on investing in Bitmine because I'm bullish on Ethereum. Right? But understand, I will always have some cryptos where I control the keys. Because the minute you start investing in treasury corporations, right? The minute I start thinking, oh, I trust Michael Saylor, let me invest in strategy. Folks, understand, people retire from these corporations. Right? Jack Welch is no longer the head of GE. Right? You thought you were getting Jack Welch. You ended up with Jeffrey Immelt. Then you find out, then you realize that you don't have your crypto keys, not your crypto. Right? You need to hedge everything. So if I invest in Bitmine, I'm going to make sure that I have some Ethereum where I have control of the keys, where the Ethereum is on my ledger, right? Not on one of these centralized exchanges, right? So, folks, assume we're in a recession, assume it's going to get worse, assume you need to protect yourself, assume that these so-called political experts aren't experts, right, folks? We now realize that all of these, COVID vaccines carried huge risks, right? At the time, you had commercials, celebrities, people from government telling you you should get vaccinated, right? No one added, this might weaken your heart, right, folks? It's moving too fast. Technology really can't be stopped, right? You need to consider every job the way you consider being an Uber driver, right? You understand that even Uber, the company, is hedging its bets by investing in compatibility with robotaxis. You need to hedge your bets. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comments section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.